Hello, welcome to Roussel Reads. I'm Deja, and today we are going to be talking about some books that I recently read. So, it has actually been quite a few months since I've done my last recent reads. I have been meaning to do one for the longest, but I just never really found the time to schedule to do one. Today, I'm actually going to talk about the books that I've read August through October, and then for the books that I read November through December, I will talk about in early next year. So since we have quite a few books to get through, let's go ahead and get started. The first one that I have to talk about is Birth of a Dynasty. This one I received as an ARC from NetGalley, so thank you to the publisher for that. And I did mention this one in quite a few of my vlogs as I was reading it, and I didn't really know how I felt about it immediately after finishing it. And I kept saying that as I was reading it that it just felt like a slow start to something, and I think that is the perfect way to describe it. This story definitely just feels like it's building up to something bigger, and I feel like the entire story felt like that, but I feel like by itself it was still a solid story. I feel like this book felt a little bit like a prequel to me, that was like you're getting all of this set up to get all of the bigger payoff things. Like, you're establishing the characters, you're establishing and including a little bit of mystery into the fantastical elements and the politics and all of that. So I really enjoyed that. The book also starts off with this very brutal massacre of the royal family, and it definitely hooked me from the start, and then it just kind of slows down from there. But I really just enjoyed being with all of the characters. I feel like usually with these kinds of stories, when you are just pretty much setting up everything and there's not a lot externally happening, I feel like I'm usually not into those kinds of stories, but I think because this book is less than 400 pages, I was pretty engaged with everything going on. Like I said, I really like the characters, and not just the main characters. The main characters, which I'm forgetting their names, but one of the main characters was one of the royal family members from the family that was massacred in the first chapter. And he's basically pretending not to be that so he can exact his revenge. The other main character is a younger girl who is pretty much too young to really care about all the political things. But both of these characters, they don't really meet until the end, but the way that the author sets up these two characters, I'm very curious where their stories are going to go in the next book, because now that this book has set up everything, I feel like it was pretty solid. So this is one that I would definitely pick up. It is an all black fantasy world inspired by West African societies. I don't want to say Nigerian, but I almost want to say it's Nigerian, but just West African societies. And yeah, I think those that are fans of Game of Thrones, that that slow build of political things and a large cast of characters, I think that people who like that would enjoy this if they want more of a shorter, concise version of it. The next one that I read was Threads of Destiny. This is an author that was new to me, and I did really enjoy this one. This was just a short novella that I read on Hoopla just to get a taste of the author. I believe that this one came to me by recommendation on Threads because I was looking for more closed door romances, and this is what this author writes. And this one, like the last one, I think it felt like a prequel. And this one is categorized as a prequel. So I kind of knew that going in. And while I did like it, I think that the problem that I have with most prequels is that they don't necessarily give you a solid story in the prequel. I feel like this prequel, it establishes the characters really well. I really am interested in following these two characters getting their happily ever after. But I feel like the main point of this was just to introduce the characters for an upcoming series that the author has, but not necessarily telling an entertaining story. I feel like the first half of this book was just pretty much a lot of backstory, and that wasn't necessarily interesting to read. And then when we actually get the two characters to meet after the halfway point, I think they have chemistry, and I do like their dynamic and what's at stake for them. But because that first half was just so much background on their relationships and why they need to get in this relationship, I wasn't necessarily in love with it. But I guess for a prequel, it did its job in making me interested in the next book or whatever the first book is going to be. I have no idea what it's going to be. I haven't heard any news about it. So yeah, I guess this was a solid like 3.5 stars for me. Not like a new favorite, but an author that I'm definitely interested in trying more of. The next one that I have is a historical romance called The Deuce Defiant Cinderella. And this one was definitely a solid 4-star read for me. At first I wasn't sure how I would like it because the female main character, she is a servant to the male love interest's family, but that's quickly rectified because she is actually the secret daughter of some comte, I guess, and so they're actually on kind of like equal playing fields. And they were actually supposed to be married because their fathers were friends, but she's just like the lost daughter or whatever. But the male main character is just like, I need somebody of better like ranking, like a nobody with like a background as a servant, and so it brings this like tension between them and they don't speak to each other. Then we fast forward when like she's older and he is coming back after his father died, and they kind of have to like fake date because it's been publicized that they are engaged to be married, and basically so that they're not like ruined by society, they have to come back together and fake date in front of the queen and all of that, and in the process they fall in love with each other. This is a closed door romance, but like I feel like there was like foreplay that was mentioned in it, so like we didn't see like necessarily everything, but we did like get like some lead up to it, which I really liked because I usually like the tension before like the actual like acts of having sex. So I really appreciated the story for that. And one thing about historical romance by BIPOC authors that I really like is that like it doesn't ignore like the racial aspect of it. Both of these characters are actually biracial, and the reason that the main character needs to get a better like bride in society is because his father was kind of ruined from society for marrying a black woman. So he's just like, I need to kind of get back into the good graces of the queen. And so I feel like they don't ignore those like racial aspects of being, in this case, in a French court. And so I just feel like all of it together really worked well for me. Like I was just kicking my feet and giggling reading this, and I really enjoyed it. Like I just enjoyed like having the two characters be together. I enjoyed like just like the little like moments where they were trying to like fight their feelings for each other. And I will say that the only thing I didn't enjoy was just like this little plot of kind of like a mystery. I feel like somebody was like intentionally trying to break off the marriage, and it's very predictable like who it is, so I'm just like, that's whatever. But the relationship between the two characters I really liked being in the historical world. So yeah, this is definitely an author I would try out again. The next one that I have is Candace Universe and Everything. This one was by an author that I have read before when I was, I don't even know, this author has been writing for a minute, so yeah, I definitely wanted to pick up their new work. And I thought that this one was okay. This was a middle grade following a young girl who has this locker that's kind of like a time warp, time travel portal thing. And because she has this locker now, it connects her to these two older women that also had this locker. I think I came into the story wanting a little bit more of like the sci-fi and like the why of it all, but I feel like the story was really about the friendship aspect of it. I think that Candace, at the beginning of the year, she was having issues with her current friends and just like those kind of issues when you're in middle school and you're starting to transition and find different things that you like and all of that. So her connecting with these two older women kind of gave her a new friendship that she needed. It was a heartwarming story and I did enjoy it, but it did take me a little bit to come around to that idea that it was more about the friendship aspect. So I do think that this would be good for that maybe 11, 12, 13 age range that maybe want to dive into a little bit of the speculative elements, but not necessarily like very like heavy on it, because there's like those aspects of like the time travel and stuff is there, but it's not like the main purpose. The main purpose is the friendship aspects and more of like a coming of age story, I want to say. So yeah, I thought that this was a solid story and I would recommend it for that middle grade audience. The next one that I have is the Magic and Melanin anthology. I was reading this for a few months, and I think like most anthologies, there's some hits and there's some misses. I think that for the most part, I did enjoy the anthology. Of course, I have my favorites. The stories that I didn't really like, I don't necessarily remember, but I thought that they were mostly 3 stars. But I think if you are looking for authors that are in the black fantasy genre that you want to try, I would definitely say check this out because there's definitely a wide range in this. And I think that the stories that I really liked, they just align more with my taste than like some of the other ones that just read a little bit more younger than like a new adult reader like me. So this is definitely one that I would say check out just to see like where your tastes align. But yeah, I would recommend trying this out. The next two that I read are actually manga, and this is Blood on the Tracks 1 and 2. And I decided that after volume 2 that I am not going to continue this because this went in a direction that I was not expecting. So volume 1, I was very much intrigued with. Like throughout the entire volume you get the sense that like something's off with his mother, and it's just so creepy. But then the book ends and you're just like, what just happened? And I don't want to say like anything like too spoilery, but like when that ending of volume 1 happened, I was like, okay, I need to read the second one. So then I go into the second one, and you still get that sense that like there's something wrong with the mother, and they're trying to deal with the aftermath of what happens in volume 1. But then the way that the volume 2 ended, I was just like, you know what? I have to check out because I just no, it just made me very uncomfortable. And I think that's the point, of course, because you're reading this and what happens is just uncomfortable for like a normal person, but it made me uncomfortable in a way that I'm just like, I don't need to know how the story ends. And I'm actually gonna like talk about a little bit what happens because I feel like people should know this going into it if they want to read like a manga. And since I've only read volume 1 and 2, I'm not sure how twisted it gets. So I will put a timestamp for when the spoilers end and you can like skip through. But I will talk about spoilers in 3, 2, 1. So what happens is that the mother is kind of trying to be in some kind of relationship with her son. Like, yeah, the first volume ended with her pushing the cousin off of a cliff. And I was like, okay, like we know like she's twisted, like yeah, that I can deal with. I just didn't know what kind of twisted she was gonna be. But then the second volume ends with her kissing her son on the mouth after telling him to like discard this other girl's number that was trying to like date him. And I was just like, what? Like it went in a direction that I was just like, I was not expecting that. Like I knew it was going to be a dark and twisted like story, but I didn't think it would have that. So I just yeah, I'm not going to continue that because I don't need to read that. The next one that I have is Loving Safwa. And this one I tried for my paranormal romance reading vlog. And for this one, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily like what you would get from a paranormal romance. I feel like this is more literary. You're following this woman who is basically dating a vampire, and you get more of like how they met, of course, but then I feel like you don't necessarily get like how they fall in love. It's more so like telling the story of Safa, who is the vampire, and like her history, but then also the story of like this main character also wanting to become a vampire. So yeah, I feel like it's way more literary than it was like romantic, but I will say that the romantic scenes were definitely filled with like a lot of tension. And so I feel like if you're looking for a romance, I don't think you'll get this, but like if you're looking for like a solid couple and like it has a romantic element to it, I think that you would enjoy this. I did find myself enjoying it. I think that there was a lot of like interesting elements to it. Sappho's background, I think she's from Ghana, so her background and like how she became a vampire was intriguing to me. More so the part after she became a vampire, because the how she becomes a vampire is kind of like typical, but like the after part was what like intrigues me, and like how she went on like living her life. And I thought that the ending and like where they end up being with each other was also very interesting. It kind of left off in this like utopia kind of place, and yeah, I think that there was a lot of interesting elements to it. But if you want like a typical romance, I wouldn't say that you would get that in this. Like this is just more of a short literary read that has like romantic elements, but not necessarily what I would pitch to a normal romance reader, if that makes sense. But like I said, like the world was interesting. I think that the romantic tension that was there was really good. So yeah, I give this one a solid 4 stars. The next one that I have is more of the typical paranormal romance that I read for that Love in the Night reading vlog, and this is Love is a Beast by Melody Lynch. This is one that I wasn't necessarily in love with. I feel like there were interesting elements to it, but like I don't think that the execution was that good. So this is a shorter novel, which I think is part of like the downfall of it because I think that the author tried to cover a lot for how short this book was. So in the beginning, we're following this character. I don't even know her name either, but we're following this female main character and her boyfriend. Like they don't end up lasting together. So then she ends up meeting this new love interest who is a werewolf, which she doesn't know at first, but she ends up finding out that he's a werewolf, and the story goes on from there. I feel like part of my problem with this is that I feel like the first half of this book was not that interesting. I feel like you get that stereotypical like start where like she's sensing that something's off with him but not really sure, but he's not really like telling her about it, and I'm just like, okay, that's fine. But I also think that one of the things that I didn't like about this story is that like whatever romance that they actually get with each other happens off page, and so like we don't necessarily see them falling in love with each other. But then when like all of these action things start happening and like she actually finds out that he is a werewolf, then we're just like, oh, they love each other. Yeah. So, yeah, I feel like the romance wasn't really like my thing for this one. And I also feel like the world could have been cool. Like I really love when like black authors do black werewolves just because of like the history that they create with it and stuff. So, I feel like it could have been cool, but the last half of this book really became very action packed, and I feel like I just never really got a moment to really like sit and like just be in that paranormal world. Like she's introduced to like so much at once, but this is all during the action part of it. And then by the time the book ends, like I don't think that there's really any aspects of that paranormal world that we're really gonna get just because of what happens. So yeah, I feel like the world also wasn't executed well in addition to the romance. But also I just did not really care about any of the characters. Like I think the female main character, she was fine at first, but I just there's she just started annoying me in the ending. Like I just the characters that don't do anything except like just be there, I just no, I didn't really like her. And then the male main character, he wasn't really even in the last half of the book because of all the things happening. And so, like, I couldn't really fall for him either. And like I said, like, the romance happened off page. So I didn't really care about the relationship. So I was like, I'm following these characters that I don't really like. I'm in this world that I don't really understand because the female main character doesn't really understand. And the pacing is just off. So, like, I don't know. I thought this was a kind of mad book for me, and I wanted to like it because, like I said, I like Black paranormal worlds. But yeah, I just feel like this left more to be desired. Overall, I gave this one 3 stars. It just left a lot to be desired. It could have been good, but I just think it needed more pages to fully be the story that I think it wanted to be. And then we have Magic Bites, which was a recommendation that I finally read from Heather at HEA Booktubes. And so this one I did enjoy. I think in the beginning I wasn't necessarily invested just because it had like this more mystery plot to it. And I am just not a huge detective mystery kind of person. Like I just don't really like those kind of stories. So I wasn't really that invested, but I will say that I think that the paranormal world is really cool. Like just with like the vampires and just all the other like creatures. It has like that darker urban fantasy feel to it, which I really enjoyed. So I really like that aspect. Now, when it comes to Kate, I didn't really like her voice. Like, she just gave me very much older paranormal romance heroine, like, a voice. Like, kind of, I don't want to say witty, but just, is it witty? I don't think that's the right word. I don't know. Just her voice just wasn't necessarily like for me. But like I said, like the world was pretty cool. And I think by the ending, I'm actually like very intrigued to see like where the story goes. So I think I am gonna try the next book and maybe the next few books just to see how I think about it because I did like the world and I think that the relationship that is starting to build between her and Callan, Caleb, something. It starts with a C. Whatever relationship is starting to build with him, like I like him because I will also say that I think that the male main character he is definitely giving like alpha male vibes, but he also is giving me more depth than I think a lot of other books that are being published nowadays who also use that kind of alpha male trope are giving for those male main characters. So I think that this is one that I would definitely still try for like the next one just to see like how I think about it. The next book that I have is Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse, and I was actually calculating how long it took me to read this book, and it was around 7 to 8 months. So I probably should have just DNF'd this, but I went in with the expectation that I was not going to like this. One, because I knew from the cover that the main character, I guess, kind of this book would be Naranpa, who I knew I didn't really like in the first book. So I was like, I wasn't really crazy about that. But then also, almost everybody who's read this book has not liked the second book. And they kind of gave it the excuse of being like the middle book syndrome. And so I had the expectations that I was not going to like this. But since I knew that, I was also kind of thinking that maybe I'd be able to push through. And I did. But yeah, it took me 7, 8 months. So I'm not gonna go into too much like depth about this because this is the second book of a trilogy. But my main issue with this story was like the pacing. It just felt so unreasonably slow for being less than 400 pages. And I just feel like everything that was happening just felt like filler content. I know that it's all going to connect and lead to the third book, but I just felt like so much of this book, like it was felt like it wasn't leading anywhere and that we were just in these scenes with characters. I feel like in the first book, I think that the author had like a clear vision of how this book needed to end for the next book to start. But I don't think that there was like a clear purpose of like how this book needed to end so we could get to the third book. I just felt like a slog to get through. I still really love Serapio, but Shiala, she pretty much annoyed me in this book because of how lovesick she seemed to be over Serapio, which annoyed the mess out of me. So I I don't know how I'm gonna feel about her in the next book because I think that the next book, which is the last book in the trilogy, is going to focus more on her and her world. So I'm a little nervous about that, especially because it's like 600 pages. She did get a little bit better towards the end, but I don't know. The lovesick aspects of Shiala, while Serapio, he had his moments where he was like, "Oh, I miss like Shiala and like their connection and stuff," but he also stood on business and like what he needed to do. Like I just wanted that more from Shiala. That's why I just felt like a lot of this felt like filler content and like the longing, the yearning. Like if this was a romance, then okay, yeah. But I need stuff to be happening, and I don't feel like a lot was happening in the second book. So I'm still gonna read the last book because it's the last book in our trilogy, and I think that the way it left off, I'm still intrigued with. And I was talking to like another person about it, and they kind of made me intrigued to see like how it's going to end. But yeah, the second book was highly disappointing. And the last book that I had to talk about is like, a novella that also kind of disappointed me, and this is Psychopomp and Circumstance. This one, I was hopeful for it because it sounded very interesting. It basically follows this young woman who is going to go bury her aunt. There's like some death practices and like horror elements that are entwined with this, but I feel like this story was just kind of slow to me. Like it just wasn't really keeping my attention that much. And I think part of it is because I think part of the story had those like horror elements to it. And when those parts of the story like showed up, like I was invested. But then the other parts of the story felt like they were more about like the character exploring her grief. But I don't think that it was necessarily exploring grief in like a, I don't want to say a useful way. Like I just feel like the way that they explored grief, like I don't feel like it impacted or developed her character in any kind of way. Is that what I'm trying to say? I just feel like, but not necessarily for like a plot point, if that makes sense. I know that the death practices were very interesting, and I did really like the female main character in the very beginning of the story, but soon I just feel like the story itself didn't necessarily captivate me, didn't necessarily leave me feeling like the horror of it all. And maybe it's just like a soft horror. I don't know. I'm not usually like a horror reader, so like I'm still trying to dip my toes into that genre, but I don't know what this book was supposed to leave me with. Like, and I think that's part of why I'm just kind of like mad. Like, I don't really know what I was supposed to get from this. Was it supposed to be like an exploration of grief? I don't know. Did it kind of do that? Yeah, I guess. But was it supposed to be more of like exploring like the death practices and like the horror elements of it? Maybe. But did we get all of that? I don't necessarily think that we did. But I don't know. I feel like for a novella, maybe it was just trying to do like two different things, and I don't think that they necessarily connected well. So yeah, but overall, I thought that it was fine. I will try another Eden Royce book because this was my first Eden Royce book, and I've heard nothing but great things about. Oh, what? There was some middle grade book that she wrote, so I'd heard nothing but great things about that book. So I am going to try more by this author, but this one was not like a good introduction for me. So I'm going to go into her next book with very middle of the road expectations. But that is all of the books that I read for August through October. Quite a few books, and unfortunately, not a lot of like amazing reads, more of like middle of the road reads, but still had some solid reads that I'm excited to try more from the authors. So, yeah, but that'll be all for this video. I really thank you so much for watching, and if you don't have a comment to say, then you just leave whatever emoji I put on the screen. But again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!